I just wanted to start with this perspective where Martinus says, I saw how every limited thing, irrespective of whatever size it might occupy, revealed infinity and thereby eternity. And it's from the article called Cosmic Consciousness. And I think it's a topic that we often talk about when we have our courses. For example, when we talked about prayer in Germany with our friends who are also here this day, when you're feeling, you just look up into the night sky and see how our whole world opens up, which could equally well be our microcosmos, as you said, Anne. So to realize that we have those two dimensions all the time. We have the eternal dimension that Martinus tells us about, and we are gradually trying to sort of grow into that, to develop a consciousness that can understand the eternal dimension. But of course, we also have the temporal dimension that you, Tove, also mentioned, when we are born as vulnerable small babies, literally in every incarnation and also in the great spiral cycle. And I just wanted to show you another quote where Martinus shows us the contrast between those two perspectives. And I have translated this myself just for today. Thus, the difference between the psyche of the terrestrial human being and the psyche of the universe is that the present psyche of the terrestrial human being only allows perception in the temporal world, whereas the psyche or the consciousness of the universe perceives in eternity. And it's from between the two world epochs. And just to remind ourselves that when we are focused on trying to understand the eternal sides, of course we have all the experiences connected to our temporal world, and not least when we are tied to the very materialistic world picture that we talked a lot about yesterday. But we always have those two perspectives, and I guess one of our tasks now is to see that we can connect them, that they are actually part of oneness in its innermost kernel. And just to show another, to just turn to the science of today, where we have, as Nikolaj showed yesterday, and Rune also, that there are a lot of scientists who are actually working on the borderland. And this is just a quote from one of those researchers often quoted, Pim van Lommel, who wrote a book called Consciousness Beyond Life, where he tells about his research on near-death experiences. But he quotes an earlier Dutch author and psychiatrist who says, all science is empirical science, all theory is subordinate to perception, and a single fact can overturn an entire system. And I just thought that is inspiring, because my own background is an academic background, and you can fall in love with theories and concepts in the academic world. You can really fall in love because it's interesting and inspiring to use your intellect, and that's great. But in fact, our whole perception of the world is built on empiric. How could it be otherwise? All science is empirical science, and it is our perception that is the basis for all our theories. We tend to forget it sometimes, but when we find out new things, we have to make new theories, because theories are just theories. And of course, Martinus tells us that he sees how life is built up. It's not a theory. He didn't sit down and think about it. He saw it by the help of intuition, by his intuitive faculty, and by cosmic consciousness. And he tells us that this is what we all will learn eventually. So just as a starting point, it is our perception that we all use. And I think the world's development today shows us that more and more people actually tell us about their empirical perception, their experiences. And this is what science needs to build upon. Otherwise, we won't be able to use the theoretic framework that we have today. So, but just to go back to what Mary started with yesterday, and what Rune also says, we have those two dimensions. We have the visible world and we have the invisible world. And as you see, Martinus here says, thus we can see that there are two kinds of matter. We have matter visible to our senses and matter invisible to our senses. And that is what he tells us again and again and again, and what you also talked about today. And it's from the article Through the Empty Space of the Universe. And of course, our consciousness, which perhaps we have just earlier termed our soul. And earlier you just instinctively felt that, yes, we had a soul. We believe we have a soul. And now we start to realize there is such a thing as consciousness. We just don't understand what it is and how it works. But we understand that there is more to the eye, or more to the world than meets the eye, or more than we understand. And here we have an overview. I hope you can see it, which I have actually copied. If you recognize it, it's because I copied from a lecture by another lecturer here, Søren's lecture, Søren Grind's lecture, not because we have a copyright to our lectures, but I thought it was such a nice overview that I just asked if I could copy it. And it's just a summary of what Mary showed us yesterday so beautifully with this symbol number 6 that we have seen several times. So we see to the left Martinus's triune principle, what we can only divide analytically, but what we need to divide analytically, at least right now. We have the eternal I, X1. We have X2, the faculty to create and experience, and X3, the created world, our consciousness and our bodies. And to the right, you see those terms that Mary mentioned yesterday. Martinus gives us a spiritual science, which means that he gives us a lot of terms and categories to operate with. So we have our superconsciousness equals X1, X2. Sometimes he focuses on X2, and sometimes he encompasses X1 and X2, but this is our eternal structure. And then we have our subconsciousness, which he again divides into our day consciousness, which is what we are experiencing right now, where we see each other very clearly, experiencing everything clearly, more or less clearly, at least. And then our night consciousness, where we perhaps this night, where we all go to sleep, perhaps we will continue this interesting discussion in our night consciousness, but not remember it in the morning tomorrow, but perhaps we will have sort of a dim remembrance. Perhaps you talk to all of those people during the night, and that might very well be, but it's our night consciousness, and we could talk a long time about that. Mary showed us also those other dimensions of consciousness where Martinus shows us our huge moral development from devil consciousness, which also Tove mentioned today. We have seen everything about our karma, the karma of mankind that we very clearly see around us today, and also our gradual development through reincarnation and karma towards Christ consciousness. So these are other dimensions of consciousness. And in order to understand this huge development, we need to understand this road, this long development through the different kingdoms, where we actually pass this stage called cosmic unconsciousness, symbolized in the symbol number 5 here to the left. But where we also see how we gradually develop our consciousness, above other things, also our faculty to think, to use our logical thoughts, and at the same time we experience more and more suffering and also develop our feeling. But Nikolaj yesterday, especially for those of you who weren't here, but you can see that later on, he said something interesting. He said, in order to experience, we need a perspective. And I know that Solveig, who's here today, always talked about what you call it in English, the mountain of perception. Fornemmelsebjerg. I can't hear you, Mary.
Yeah, now
the sensory mountain or something
sensory mountain, perhaps.
Something like that, the mountain of sensory perception.
Yeah, I think that's the maybe
the sensory mountain. Yeah, but I think the sensory mountain, of course, that when you show it, so that's all our life experiences, but the way Nikolaj dealt with it yesterday, of course, that dealt with how we are trying to use our intellectual capacity to grasp with this division of body and mentality. And he showed us that mankind has tried to think about this and try to make theories about this ever since we started using our intellect, probably. And he showed us all these different approaches: dualism, double aspect theory, materialism, highly dominating today, which is, of course, quite logically, when we are going through a materialistic period, the perspective is materialistic. So it's logical that the philosophy is also materialism. And then some other newer approaches like panpsychism, idealism, which is slightly older, connected to romanticism and so on, and cosmopsychism, idealistic cosmopsychism. So I'm just repeating them today. You can listen to his presentation later, but if you see it as a unity, you can see how human beings have used their intellectual capacity and tried to figure out those two dimensions. How can it be that we have a body and that we think? Are they connected? How are they connected? What causes the other, and what is this, and what is the world, and is there something behind it all, and so on. So it's quite exciting, actually, to think about this. And then Rune went on yesterday and talked about many different aspects, and I just mentioned some of them here. The mystery of consciousness and matter, but you called it actually the mystery of life and matter, where you mentioned the eternal light of love. And I think you used the phrase, we are all surfing on this cosmic field of consciousness. I just loved it, so I just wanted to quote it. You talked about matter as a result, not of chance or just something that just comes from itself, but as a result of God's eternal creation, as a result of our creative capacity and of God's creative capacity, because that's the same thing. And that matter is not physical, but it's waves. And that consciousness and electric forces are mediated by photons, by light. And that all is electricity. And you talked about the mystery of water. And I felt I'm not going to into that at all, but you can ask Rune questions if you want to bring it up now. But of course, it's very exciting to see how the philosophic aspect that Nikolaj brought up also, of course, connects to the more natural sciences and the way scientists try to understand the mysteries of life, the mysteries of matter. And it seems to me, who is not a natural scientist, that the more you discover, the more mystery you find, which makes it all exciting, because you don't really see the kernel of it. That's what we would see from our perspective. And then you have just listened to it, so this will be very brief. I thought it was very moving and important to be remembered of the things that you brought that to, the vulnerability of all our ourselves as living beings, as all living beings, when we incarnate, our physical living conditions, fear of death, and our upbringing, relationships, how much that means to us, human development and human needs that you mentioned, and how our relationships to other living beings also the way I understand it, are connected to a relationship to God. And again, of course, the great importance of reincarnation and life as a mirror, to just refer to Søren Grind's first book, Life, Your Mirror, where you write about this whole cosmic psychology from a reincarnation perspective. And then we just listened to Anne's beautiful lecture of our inner world of thoughts and how important it is to be aware of our inner universe and our interconnectedness. I really felt peace when you talked about all this, that we feel everything falls together. The power of thought really came to life to me, and the power of healing, and how healing it is just to think the thought universal love. Just to think that, to listen to it, has a healing effect, at least to me. So that was an extremely brief summary of a few of those aspects that we have listened to, and these are some possible questions for reflection, just as a starting point. And they could be these things. How are those dimensions of consciousness of life, how are they interconnected? Because I think they really are interconnected. And what areas do you think are the most interesting and inspiring when it comes to further studies in spiritual science, where I think we have just seen the beginning? So where do you think we will go from here? And as I already mentioned, what insights of the nature of consciousness have given you insights and joy and inspiration in your everyday life? Perhaps something that you would like to share with us, or sharing just personal experiences of moments where you have felt connected to a higher consciousness, or just other things that you would like to share. So these are just few possible questions, and I would like to thank all of you so much for sharing all your knowledge and those inspiring reflections and dimensions of consciousness. And when you think about what Martinus has written of consciousness, we haven't even begun to cover it. So I'm sure that many of you are here also could bring up more quotes and more interesting aspects of the things that Martinus has written about consciousness in his different articles and in his work. So that would also be very welcome. So, but I think I'll just stop there and leave the word to you. So, thank you, and I'll stop sharing.